Welcome back to Southeast Asia Radio. On this week's episode, we'll be covering devastating floods that happened in Malaysia and Thailand, Indonesia's regional election, and Vietnam's approval of its ambitious high-speed railway.
We'll also be covering two adorable 3-year-old golden tigers named Luna and Ava in Thailand. I'm Japhet Kitsan. Today is December 12th, 2024. This week, Greg and Elina were joined by Camille Elemia to discuss the evolving political situation between the Marcos and Dutertes families in the Philippines. Before that, let's start with our headlines.
Hey everyone, please give a warm welcome to Japhet, who just returned from their trip from the region.
Thanks, Lauren. It's great to be back, great to catch up, and I hope I didn't miss anything exciting while I was gone.
You didn't miss much, except maybe a couple of adorable updates.
Okay, like what?
Do you remember Mudang, the famous baby pygmy hippopotamus?
Yeah.
Well, the Chiang Mai Night Safari now has two superstars stealing the show, Ava and Luna, a pair of 3-year-old golden tiger cubs. Born on February 16th, 2021, these striking siblings are attracting visitors with their gorgeous and rare coloring. Their parents were brought to the park all the way from the Czech Republic and South Africa back in 2015.
Wow, that's incredible. So golden tigers, also called strawberry tigers, are really rare. Like white tigers, their unique coloring comes from a recessive gene mutation. But here's the fascinating part. In the wild, fewer than 1 in 10,000 tiger cubs are born with white fur, and the golden trait is even rarer. Experts believe that there are fewer than 100 golden tigers in the whole world. No wonder Ava and Luna are causing such a buzz. They're beautiful.
Absolutely. If you're planning a visit, you can go and see Ava and Luna in the Tiger World Zone at the Chiang Mai Night Safari. The park is open daily from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m., so do not miss out on meeting these rare beauties.
I really wish I could go. On to our main stories. Both Thailand and Malaysia are grappling with severe monsoon floods that have devastated communities, claimed lives, and forced thousands from their homes. In southern Thailand, the death toll from flooding has now risen to at least 29, with torrential rain sweeping through the region since late November. These floods have caused widespread damage, submerging villages and cutting off roads in multiple provinces, including Songkhla and Yala.
Thai authorities are working around the clock to provide relief to the affected areas. Over 100,000 people have been displaced, with rescue teams mobilized to evacuate residents and deliver essential supplies. However, challenges persist as rain continues to fall in some regions, slowing recovery efforts. Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra has visited flood-hit areas, promising additional support to communities still at risk.
Meanwhile, across the border in Malaysia, heavy monsoon rains have also wreaked havoc, particularly in the southern state of Johor. Floodwaters have inundated homes, forcing over 80,000 people into temporary shelters. Rescue and emergency teams have been deployed to assist evacuees, but the scale of the disaster has stretched resources.
As water levels in some parts of Malaysia begin to recede, attention is shifting towards the aftermath of the floods. Volunteers and health officials are on a high alert for waterborne diseases such as leptospirosis and dengue fever, which often surge after flooding events. The Malaysian government has launched public health campaigns to educate affected communities about sanitation and disease prevention while deploying medical teams to flood-hit regions.
In both Thailand and Malaysia, experts warn that climate change could intensify the region's monsoon seasons in the years ahead, leading to more frequent and severe flooding. Efforts to bolster infrastructure, improve drainage systems, and enhance early warning systems are critical to mitigating the impact of future disasters.
As the rainy season continues, we'll be monitoring developments in Thailand and Malaysia and the ongoing fight against the aftermath of these floods.
Up next, in a significant political development, Pramono Anung, the candidate backed by Indonesia's opposition Indonesian Democratic Party of Struggle, or PDIP, has secured the governorship of Jakarta. This victory marks a notable shift in the capital's political landscape.
Pramono received 50.07% of the vote in the November 27th election, narrowly surpassing the 50% threshold required to avoid a runoff. His main opponent, Ridwan Kamil, endorsed by President Prabowo Subianto and former President Joko Widodo, garnered 39.4% of the vote.
This outcome delivers a setback to President Prabowo, whose coalition had previously dominated regional elections across Indonesia. The loss in Jakarta, a city that contributes a fifth of the nation's economic output, underscores the capital's unique political dynamics.
Analysts suggest that Pramono's victory could invigorate the opposition, providing them with a strategic foothold in Jakarta. This development may influence future political contests, especially as the nation approaches its next electoral cycle.
As Jakarta transitions to new leadership, all eyes will be on how Pramono Anung's administration addresses the city's challenges and implements its policy agenda. The political ripple effects of this election are expected to resonate beyond the capital.
Our next story is big news in Vietnam. Plans for a high-speed railway connecting Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City are finally picking up steam. What used to be a grueling 30-hour train ride could now be cut down to just 6 hours. We're talking about one of Southeast Asia's most ambitious infrastructure projects with a price tag of $58.7 billion.
We love infrastructure projects. This project has been in the works for over a decade, but it's now moving forward with fresh energy. The railway would stretch over 1,500 kilometers, linking Vietnam's two biggest cities, Hanoi in the north and Ho Chi Minh City in the south. Vietnam plans to finance the railway through a mix of domestic funds, foreign loans, and private investment. For a country experiencing rapid economic growth, this isn't just about speed. It's about connecting people, boosting trade, and reimagining the way Vietnam moves.
But of course, nothing this massive comes without challenges. There is a growing concern about what this could mean for the environment and the communities along the route. Building a high-speed railway isn't just about laying tracks, but it's also about balancing progress with preservation.
Absolutely. And while there are some skeptics, supporters are calling this a game changer. They argue it's more than just a railway. It's a bridge to a modern, connected Vietnam. It could ease the pressure on highways and domestic flights while making travel safer, faster, and more efficient. And let's not forget the potential impact on tourism. Imagine tourists zipping between Hanoi's Old Quarter and Ho Chi Minh City in just hours.
It's a bold vision, no doubt about it, but Vietnam has been making waves on the global stage with its ambitions. This project shows that the country is serious about modernizing and competing in an increasingly connected world. Whether it's smooth tracks ahead or some bumps along the way, this railway is definitely a story to watch.
Yeah, we'll be keeping an eye on how this unfolds. The funding, the construction, and of course, the public reaction. Vietnam is dreaming big, and we're here to see if they can turn this into reality.
And that wraps up our headlines for the day. We're doing a end-of-year special next week, so if you have any questions for Greg and Elina, please write us at scaradio@csis.org, or you can direct message us on your favorite social media platforms. Up next, Greg and Elina's conversation with Camille Elemia. Stay tuned.
Welcome back, folks. As always, I'm Greg Poling with CSIS, joined by Elina Knorr of the Carnegie Endowment. Hey, Elina.
Hey, Greg.
This is our last substantive podcast episode of 2024. We'll have one more end-of-year special where I assume we'll mostly talk about food and Elf on the Shelf. But first, one more bit of real work to do. Today, we're joined by Camille Elemia. Camille is a freelance journalist, writes for, among others, New York Times and Radio Free Asia and Benar News, used to be with Rappler, and is the co-author of the recently published book, An Unrequited Love, Dutertes' China Embrace, alongside my longtime friend Maritas Vitug, who was also, I think, the very first guest we ever had on the podcast, like 2 years ago or so, back during the Duterte administration. So, Camille, we brought you on today to talk about the telenovela playing out in Philippine politics at the moment. I'm not going to go over all of it because it's like a 2-year-long slow split between the president, now Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., and the vice president, Sara Duterte, the daughter of the Duterte you wrote about. But at the end of November, she threatened to have him killed. So why don't we start there? As wild as American politics are, to my recollection, we have not had any recent vice president threaten to have the president assassinated. So what's going on with the Marcoses and Dutertes?
Well, this split between the two biggest political dynasties didn't really start overnight. So we saw the initial signs of the split as early as 2022 after they actually won. Because at that time, Sara Duterte was already saying that she wanted to get the defense portfolio. But when they did actually win, Duterte gave it to another guy. And Sara was given the education portfolio. So at that stage, sources from within the Sara Duterte camp were already starting to have, slight doubts about why is this suddenly the case. And because Marcos actually won because of Duterte's popularity. It was actually Duterte who made the Marcos-Duterte victory happen because Duterte, of course, was a very popular name in the Philippines. Marcos, even during the campaign, was actually thinking of just sliding down because Duterte had a higher chance of winning the presidency. So now, moving back to what happened just a few weeks ago when Sara Duterte threatened an assassination of Marcos, it didn't really come as a surprise to many. I mean, insiders, but for Duterte to actually say it in public, I think that was a really big misstep on her part, because now the whole of government, like the Justice Department or National Bureau of Investigation, are already starting to investigate her. And it's such a serious accusation to do because it's the president, of course, and it's a threat to life of the president. So now, after that incident, it has started the series of impeachment complaints against her. Because initially you would just dismiss, like if you'd file an impeachment complaint against Sarah before the assassination threat, then that would pass as just, it's just politics and all that. But because she gave that threat, that all the more bolstered these opposition groups to file an impeachment complaint against her. So you're asking what's next? Definitely next year, early next year, we're going to see what's going to happen with the impeachment complaints against her. So far, we have 2 complaints against her.
So I'm tempted to ask what season of this long-running saga we're on right now. But it seems as though we're in the most exciting season, which is the assassination plots, right? And of course, Sara Duterte has said that she feels her life is threatened. So this threat against Marcos and his wife and his cousin didn't come out of nowhere. What's the context to this? Does she really have valid claims, as she says?
Honestly, we don't see any valid claims to what she's saying, because we know, like as journalists who followed her, we know that they also have their own private armies. They have really intense security around them. In fact, that was one of the main contention during the House hearings, because Sarah had, I think, 100 security personnel. So all of a sudden to claim that your life is under threat when you have all these, you have your own death squad, you have your own armies, you have the security guys. So it came off as a surprise.
What about the larger context of the fallout between, if not Marcos personally, at least kind of the Marcos clan and Sarah's father, Rodrigo Duterte? We had, there's been the long-running International Criminal Court investigation of Duterte. Now you have, Marcos continuing to say that he would never cooperate with the ICC, but also he might have to cooperate with the ICC if there were an arrest warrant issued. Duterte, former President Duterte, finally came and testified before the Philippine Congress last month and basically implicated himself, admitted to running extrajudicial death squads in Davao. The thing that, for instance, former Senator Leila de Lima was probably put in prison for trumped up charges for investigating in the first place. It was odd, to me at least, that none of the Dutertes ran or filed candidacy for next year's Senate elections, which was widely expected. So what's going on with the elder Duterte and the brothers?
Well, first of all, they did not run for the Senate because their hold of Davao was kind of at stake, because the current mayor, the youngest brother, Sebastian Duterte, isn't really well loved in Davao. And add to that the fact that Paulo Duterte is one of the black horse, so-called black horse of the black sheep, rather, of the family, isn't also well loved in Davao. Like if you talk to Davao residents, of course they love Duterte, they love Rodrigo Duterte, they love Sara, but they have doubts with the current leadership of Baste, and because Paulo Duterte was really controversial, like even decades ago, so they don't really like him. So with that in threat, their hold of Davao, their kingdom, so-called kingdom, they had to make sure first that they will return to Davao, because they have a competitor, they have an opponent, the Nograles family, which is really receiving support from Marcos. So there's that question on the Duterte's hold over Davao. So that's why they didn't run for Senate. And also, although we did talk to Sal Panelo, the former chief legal counsel, and he was actually urging Duterte to run because of the ICC. Of course, if you're a senator, then the people you'd have more power over national conversations and all that, and the ICC would be one of the factors to that, or one of the topics nationally. But eventually, they chose Davao over the Philippines of the national politics. But because of this ongoing war between the two, clearly we're seeing that the Marcos government, even though they kept Marcos and his officials kept on saying that, we would not coordinate with the ICC. But clearly what they said now was that should the ICC coerce the arrest warrant to the Interpol, then the Philippines would have no choice but to cooperate with the Interpol. That's really like 80% sure or 90% sure that the Marcos government is giving a heads up to the ICC that this is the path that you should take. Because on the other hand, they keep on saying that the Philippines is no longer part of the Rome Statute, which created the ICC. But ICC, if you really want this to push through, you have to go through the Interpol. It's really a sign. So it's, for us journalists closely following this, it's a 180-degree turn from what they would previously say.
So many twists and turns. And I think another potential plot twist is, I mean, you mentioned the impeachment charges, Camille, as well as the Senate elections coming up next year. And I've seen some news about how there might not be enough time to push ahead with these impeachment charges because of the elections coming up. What's the outlook there?
That is also an important issue because come January, so for your listeners, May is the start of the elections, right? But campaigns usually start February. And as soon as January start, actually now, politicians are already campaigning in their respective provinces, cities, because impeachment complaints start at the House of Representatives. So that will be a serious question as to how they will make this happen. Because of course, each congressman has to fend for himself or herself now because they want to ensure their victory, right? But one thing that we've seen the decades of covering Philippine politics is that if the House leaders want it, they can surely have it. And because Martin Romualdez, the Speaker of the House, who's a cousin of President Marcos, has always been at odds with Sara Duterte, then I'm sure he could find ways if they really want to pursue this. Although the Malacanang was kind of smart because before the first complaint against Sara was filed, there was a message of Marcos supposedly to lawmakers that was leaked saying that, I don't like you guys to pursue this impeachment thing. So that's, an easy cop-out for them that there was a leaked message and then Marcos later on confirmed that. But at the end of the day, it's the House leadership and the House leadership closely tied to the Marcoses care of his cousin, Martin Romualdez. They can make it happen if they want to.
Are things as bad for the Dutertes as they appear from the outside? Because it's not just the, Sara Marcos feud and Duterte's kind of self-recriminations in the Senate. You had the arrest of Pastor Apollo Quiboloy in Davao, despite Duterte trying to protect him. You've had the removal of a lot of Philippine National Police who had been based in Davao and had long been Duterte loyalists. Doesn't really look to me from the outside like there's any clear Duterte loyalists coming in the Senate midterms. Everybody's going to be, kind of warm to the administration, at least, albeit independents. As we look eventually to the next elections in 2028, are the Marcoses or at least their broader coalition ascendant here and the Dutertes kind of stumbling?
The Dutertes continue to enjoy huge public support. So it's really the outcome of the election would be really interesting to watch because even though the whole of government right now, as it appears, is going against the Dutertes, if you talk to ordinary citizens outside, ordinary Filipinos, you would see that they still love Duterte. They still love everything Duterte. And even during the House hearings, when Duterte admitted to all these death squads, to all these killings of police officials and drug suspects, it kind of even reignited the support of the people for the drug war. For many Filipinos, now the economy, prices are higher, and then they feel like crimes have gone up. And Duterte has successfully highlighted the importance of crimes before, during his campaign, during his presidency, and now, because especially with drugs. So people, because of the House hearings, people have somehow realized that, I think the drug war was really good because that's what happened during his 6-year reign in the Philippines. People were supportive of the drug war, despite their neighbors being killed, despite their friends being killed, still they support them. So now we could see that there's still that same support. And we couldn't really understand also why that remains. It might be because of the old man's charisma, which some would find questionable. Where is that charisma there? But, it's still there. And Sara Duterte continues to enjoy, although Sara Duterte's trust ratings have gone down, it's still high considering all these attacks against her, all these controversies against her. So it's something to watch out for.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you how much of Father Duterte's popularity translates to Sara, and how much of blowback do you think that will translate into for Marcos? Is it going to have any impact at all on the midterm outcomes?
There really is a chance that it would impact the outcome of the midterm elections because, as I said earlier, their so-called uni team, so that was Marcos as president and Sara as vice president, they won primarily because of Sara Duterte, because of supporters of Sara Duterte. And now, because of the breakup of this uni team, many of these supporters are choosing Duterte over Marcos. And Sara Duterte on her own is very charming to voters. I did cover her during the 2022 elections, and you know how Philippine politics is. So we were seeing that she really has that charm with voters, and her history as of course, she's a woman, and Filipinos like strong man, but Sara Duterte isn't any ordinary woman. Remember, she punched a sheriff in 2007. So she's a strong woman that would somehow fit the strong leaders that Filipinos want. So it's really Sara Duterte. It's still unexplainable to this point, even to someone who closely follows Philippine politics, why they continue to enjoy this popular support. And of course, a factor to that is we've seen that after the public fallout of the Marcoses and the Dutertes, we've seen the similar social media operations that existed during the Duterte presidency. There was a resurgence of that. So we're not sure how exactly it will play out, but definitely on social media, we are seeing that there are pro-Duterte vloggers, pro-Duterte YouTubers, pro-Duterte commenters that are pushing for a Sara Duterte candidacy in 2028. And how that will translate to 2025 remains to be seen.
Is it safe to say that we're clearly seeing the 2028 battle lines being drawn between, in all likely, Sara Duterte on one side and House Speaker Martin Romualdez on the other, not one of the other likely polls like Amy Marcos, who got bandied about so much the last time around?
Yes, we're seeing that. I mean, definitely it's going to be a Marcos versus Duterte, but we're not sure who exactly from the Marcoses will go up against Sara Duterte. Because right now, Martin Romualdez isn't that popular. Then there's another Sandro Marcos, the first son of Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who can also run for president, and Amy Marcos. But speaking of Amy Marcos, it's kind of, I don't know where she really stands right now because she was the one who built this uni team. She was the brains behind this Marcos and Duterte tandem. In fact, Bongbong Marcos and Sara Duterte didn't really know each other before running for president. So it was really Amy Marcos's idea. And now, because of what's happening, Sara Duterte supposedly is also mad or angry at Amy Marcos. But Amy Marcos still hasn't openly sided with her brother just yet. So maybe she's still hoping to fix the cracks between the two. But Sara Duterte already spoke, it's beyond repair.
A point of clarification, the other bridge between the two was former President Arroyo, right? Where does GMA stand in all of this?
Yeah, that's true. Arroyo was also a factor to that, but it's really Amy Marcos because Arroyo isn't really that close to the Marcoses. But Arroyo is very close to Sara Duterte. In fact, Sara Duterte views her as her mentor, one of her mentors. So the first time when there was no all-out public war between the two camps, Sara Duterte already, the initial symptoms of the brewing war a year ago, I think, also began when Martin Romualdez tried to oust Gloria Arroyo. So those was one of the early signs of the feud between the two because Sara stood up to Martin Romualdez and said, "Why are you doing this to Gloria Arroyo, who many believe is Sara Duterte's mentor?" She's very loyal to Gloria Arroyo. And that's why In connection with that, we're seeing similar patterns or similar policy connections with Sara Duterte and Gloria Arroyo in terms of, like, for example, China and US. Marcos, as we all know, has already shifted to the US. And Sara, despite all the attacks in the West Philippine Sea or the part of the South China Sea that's being claimed by the Philippines, Sara Duterte hasn't really spoken up about it. And we're seeing signs that she might follow what her father did during his term. And similar with Gloria Arroyo, who was seen also as pro-China, but was kind of more nuanced in handling it than Duterte.
Trust the American to shorten Gloria Arroyo's name to GMA. Speaking of strongmen, we have a strongman in the US coming into office in the next month. And so is what's going on domestically in the Philippines going to have any bearing at all on US-Filipino ties, let alone the alliance relationship?
It depends on what's going to happen in 2028, on who the next president will be. But if it's, as we speak now, it's 2024, and then in 2028, Marcos will still be the president. Then for many Filipino officials, whatever happens in the US will not affect the so-called ironclad alliance between the two countries, because they believe it's a treaty, so it's not politics, it's not personality politics, at least that's what they like to say. But yeah, we're not seeing that the US elections affecting so far what's going to happen concerning the alliance between the two countries. But come 2028, if we have Sara Duterte as president, or if we have a shift in policy when it comes to foreign policy, then likely it will affect the partnership or the alliance between the two countries. Because Sara Duterte, if she wins, is expected to be pro-Beijing, like her father and GMA or Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. Because all signs right now, as we speak, point to that. All of her actions right now.
Could you pick that apart a little bit more, Camille? Because I think from the U.S. government's perspective, what I heard toward the end of the Duterte administration, while they were doing a lot more outreach to Sara as mayor of Davao, she came on one of the trips for governors from the Philippines, mayors from the Philippines to the U.S., getting more love from the U.S. Embassy. And I think the consensus among U.S. officials and in the public was that Sara was far more pragmatic than her father, was, yes, more likely to seek balance between the U.S. and China, but didn't have the same kind of deeply ingrained personal animus toward the U.S. that her father does. Because for her father, much like Trump in the U.S., all of this is personal, and he just doesn't like Americans. Does the U.S. overinterpret that? Are they too optimistic that while Sara might not be as pro-American as they like, she'll be easier to work with than her father was?
Definitely, she's easier to work than her father in many aspects. The old Duterte is really one of a kind. But I think the U.S. officials are being too optimistic, especially now with what's happening with Marcos and Duterte. I'm just guessing from talking with people who know Sara. Sara might just think that the U.S. somehow has an involvement in this, in what's happening. It could be far-fetched, but if you're already so angry at your enemy, then anything that is the ally of your enemy is already your enemy. So there could also be a chance for that. So the U.S. officials might be too optimistic, especially with what's happening now in terms of Philippine politics between the two biggest political dynasties we have now. And because China has made its inroads, even with the third relatives, like under Baste, they continue their sister city deals and all that. So I think it's very difficult to remove Sara from that China equation. But of course, there's still hope, because as I said, Sara is not like her father. I think you can really talk to Sara compared to the dad. But it's dangerous to be too optimistic now, especially what we've seen with the Duterte patriarch.
Well, I promised we'd get to the book, Camille. So why don't we get to the book? Your book with Marcoses, Unrequited Love. It's all right there in the title, right? The elder Duterte's foreign policy was premised around pivoting the Philippines toward Beijing, and he really didn't get anything out of it. He didn't get the economic benefits. He didn't get a softening in the South China Sea. Marcos has gone the other way. And his foreign policy, at least in the polling, is much more popular with the Philippine public, and certainly more popular with the armed forces than Duterte's was. But do you expect that we will then, if there were another change toward a Sara Duterte administration in 2028, that we would see the same kind of unrequited effort to cozy up to Beijing?
For one, we really can't say because Beijing might have learned from its so-called mistakes with Duterte. So they might be giving some more little things because, well, to be fair, Davao did get some school buildings, some small gardens and all that from all their pivot to Beijing. But that's it. So we're seeing that it's going to happen probably the same way it did during the first Duterte administration. But who knows, maybe Beijing already learned and they would want to give some, like a bigger garden this time or a bigger school building this time. The next president, whoever gets to be the next president, whatever his or her foreign policy will be on China, one thing remains, the Filipinos for decades have strong distrust of Chinese and have strong distrust of China, especially when it comes to their actions on the South China Sea. So even if the next president shifts back to China, like what Rodrigo Duterte did, the next president won't be able to sway the Philippine institutions and the Philippine public, because I'd like to say that we have been very well colonized by the US, that we are even more pro-Americans than Americans themselves. So that would be very hard to change for the next president.
And maybe the U.S. should learn a lesson here, since Beijing has a consulate in both Davao and Ilocos Norte, to make sure that it can cultivate rising Dutertes and rising Marcoses, and the U.S. has neither, or any representation anywhere else outside of Manila.
Yes, that's really true. And the fact that they should make sure as early as now, and the U.S. officials should make sure as early as now, they're not seen as involved in any of this politicking between Marcos and Duterte. Otherwise, if there's even a hint that Sara Duterte believes that the U.S. is somehow involved, then if she wins in 2028, then it's going to be a big problem for the U.S.
Camille, you've already painted for us a picture of so many plot twists, and a few years, even a few months in politics in any country is an eternity. And actually, I do have a closing question. It just made me wonder, what are your own projections, Camille, over the next few months, given all that you've said?
Oh, I think this is just me. I think the impeachment complaint would prosper in the House of Representatives, but we're not sure if the Senate, because it will get to the Senate. I don't know if the senators would actually want to have an impeachment trial, because it's the election season. They're also running. They also want to win. They also want themselves back in power. So maybe it will prosper in the House, but not in the Senate.
Okay. Well, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Camille, thanks so much for joining us. This was great. Elina, of course, thanks as always. And thanks all of you for listening. We'll be back in just 1 week to slot in our end of year episode before we all take a break until 2025.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of Southeast Asia Radio. Feel free to write us with any comments, questions, or feedback at searadio@csis.org, and we'll get back to you.
Do us a favor and subscribe, and give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever streaming platform that you listen to us on. Tell your friends about us.
Marla Hiller is our producer, and our intern is Narupat Ratanakit. Our co-hosts today were Greg Poling and Elina Noor. My name is Japhet Kitsan.
And I'm Lauren Mai.
And we'll see you next week for another episode of Southeast Asia Radio.